They say the high mesas of New Mexico remember everything. The thunder of horses, the songs of old spirits, and even the secrets men try to bury beneath the sagebrush. On the edge of one such mesa, with the late spring wind hissing through the grass, Micah Evans leaned on his battered fence and squinted into the fading light. He was used to solitude, but that evening felt heavy, too quiet, even for a widowed rancher accustomed to silence. Micah's world had shrunk after he buried his wife, Sarah. 3 winters passed. The days since had been little more than a worn rhythm, mending fences, tending cattle, talking to a gravestone while dusk crept in. But that evening, as a storm teased the horizon and the scent of rain rose from the earth, something unsettled the stillness, a flicker of movement deep in the sage. His hand instinctively found the old rifle resting against the porch. Coyotes had grown bold, and rumors of cattle thieves weren't uncommon. But as Micah stepped down from the porch, boots silent on the packed earth, he saw it was no coyote. Half hidden behind a tumble of prickly pear, a small figure crouched, his face smeared with dust and blood, dark eyes wide as a deer's in the lantern light. "Easy now," Micah called, voice steady. "Ain't no call to run. You hurt?" The boy shrank back, one arm cradling his ribs, the other clutching something wrapped in deerskin. He didn't answer. The lines of fear and exhaustion etched into his young face told Micah enough. He was running from something, and whatever it was had left him battered. Micah knelt a safe distance away, lowering his rifle. "Name's Micah Evans. This is my land, but you're welcome to water, and I got bread on the stove. Can you walk?" For a long moment, the boy didn't move. The wind kicked up dust, whistling through the sage. Lightning danced on the mesa, and thunder rolled, distant but promising rain. Finally, with a wince, the boy tried to stand and stumbled. Micah reached out, slow and careful, like gentling a spooked colt. The boy flinched but didn't fight as Micah slipped an arm under his shoulder. Micah led him inside the small cabin. The place was plain. Rough-hewn furniture, a faded quilt on the spare bed, Sarah's Bible on the mantel. He fetched water and a clean cloth and set about cleaning the boy's wounds. "Looks like you tangled with more than a rabbit," he muttered, dabbing at a gash on the boy's forehead. Still, the boy said nothing. His hands, scratched and trembling, clung tightly to the deerskin-wrapped object. The only clue to his origins was the faded beadwork at the collar of his shirt. Navajo, if Micah's guess was right. That alone could mean trouble. The nearest town, Silver Creek, wasn't known for kindness to strangers, least of all native children alone on white man's land. Micah tried again, gentle but firm. "You got a name? Family nearby?" Nothing. Just those watchful eyes, dark and wary, always flicking to the bundle in his lap. When the boy finally drank the water Micah offered, he sipped slow and careful, as if afraid it might vanish. The night grew deeper, thunder creeping closer, and Micah sat across from his silent guest, feeling the old ache of loneliness give way to something else, a stubborn concern. He thought of Sarah, how she would never have let a child sleep out in the cold. "You'll stay here tonight," Micah said quietly. "No harm will come to you, not while I draw breath." After the boy drifted into a restless sleep, Micah kept watch by the window. Shadows danced on the walls as the storm finally broke, drumming hard against the tin roof. Through the noise, Micah heard it, a low moan, a whisper in a tongue he didn't know. The boy, tangled in the covers, gripped the deerskin bundle tighter, sweat beading on his brow. Micah saw the boy's lips moving, repeating a word over and over, Tasani. He wondered what ghosts haunted the child's dreams. Somewhere out there, someone must be looking for him or hunting him. Either way, the trouble was bound to find its way to Micah's door. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter taste grounding him as he watched the lightning fork over the mesa. A sudden howl split the night. Wolf or coyote, maybe something less natural. Micah reached for his rifle, heart thumping. But the only threat inside the cabin was the past, lurking in both their memories. When dawn finally broke, pale and bruised after the night's storm, Micah stepped out onto the porch, every sense alert. He didn't know it yet, but the next footsteps he'd hear would change both his and the boy's life forever. For now, he only knew what any man alone in the wilds knows. Sometimes you find a stranger in need, and sometimes that stranger carries secrets bigger than the mesa itself. But Micah Evans, for all his burdens, had never been one to turn away from trouble, or from a child who needed saving. Dawn arrived sharp and gold, painting the mesa in hues of copper and rose. The rain-washed air was clean, but the tension in Micah Evans's chest only thickened. He kept a close watch on his small guest, who had barely slept, twisting and murmuring through haunted dreams. The boy, Tasani, as Micah had heard him whisper, still refused to speak, holding the deerskin-wrapped stone as if it was his last anchor to the world. Micah knew the risks. It wasn't just the land itself that bristled with danger. The folks in Silver Creek would see trouble in a Navajo boy found hiding on a white man's homestead. Worse yet, there were always men eager to stoke the old hatreds between settlers and tribes. Men with itching trigger fingers and hearts full of suspicion. But Micah couldn't turn Tasani out, not after what he'd seen in the boy's eyes. As he brewed coffee and reheated biscuits, Micah rehearsed what he might say if someone came asking. Maybe claim the boy was just passing through. Maybe tell the truth, that he'd found a child in need, and that ought to be enough for any decent soul. But as he looked out across the rain-soaked sage, he realized that explanations might not matter. A distant sound caught his ear. Hoofbeats, many, the rhythmic thunder rolling over the flat morning air. Micah's grip tightened on his rifle. He stepped to the window and squinted into the rising sun. 5 riders. Navajo, he guessed, from the cut of their ponchos and the bright beadwork flashing at their shoulders. Micah set his jaw. Stay here, he told Tasani, who shrank back against the wall, eyes darting to the door. The riders slowed as they approached the cabin, moving with quiet purpose. The leader was a tall man, silver at his temples, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Behind him, a woman rode with 2 younger braves, each holding their horses with the easy confidence of those born in the saddle. Their faces were unreadable, but the respect they gave their leader was clear. Micah stepped out onto the porch, rifle in one hand but pointed at the ground, a gesture of wariness, not threat. He met the leader's gaze with the quiet strength that had carried him through drought, loss, and too many hard winters. Morning, Micah called. If you're looking for trouble, you won't find it here. The tall man dismounted with a slow, deliberate grace. We seek a child, he said in careful English. A boy, my son. Taken from our camp 2 days past. His name is Tasani. His voice carried both the pride of a chief and the ache of a father. Micah hesitated. He glanced back toward the window, saw Tasani's frightened face just barely visible behind the curtain. He's inside, Micah said finally. He was hurt, bad. I patched him up as best I could. The chief nodded, a flicker of relief passing over his features. I am Nalnish, he said, laying a hand to his chest. Thank you, Micah Evans. My people do not forget kindness. Micah motioned for them to come in, but kept his body between the visitors and the boy. Old habits, born of too many years where trust could be a death sentence. The two younger warriors scanned the room with wary eyes, but it was Nalnish who knelt by his son, speaking softly in Navajo. For the first time, Tasani let the stone rest beside him and fell into his father's arms, tears streaking the dust on his cheeks. The sight twisted something inside Micah, a memory of another child, another storm long ago. He turned away, giving them privacy, but the tension in the room never quite broke. Nalnish stood and addressed Micah. You have risked much by sheltering my son. Many here would call it foolish or even dangerous, but you did it anyway. Why? Micah shrugged. A boy's a boy. He needed help. Didn't seem right to turn him away. The chief studied him, then motioned for the rest of his party to wait outside. There is more at work here than you know, Micah Evans. My son was taken not by enemies from without, but by a shadow within our own people. A faction who wishes to see war. You have stumbled into a struggle older than these hills. Micah frowned. I want no part of war, Chief. Just want to see the boy safe. Nalnish smiled, a grim, tired thing. Sometimes we do not get to choose. Fate brings us together for reasons the wind alone understands. He paused, then extended an invitation. You and Tahsani should come to our camp. There are things you must see, truths that belong to both our peoples. Micah hesitated, looking at Tahsani, then at the horizon where trouble might already be brewing. He thought of the boy's silence, the fear in his eyes, and the strange deerskin bundle he refused to release. All right, Micah said at last. We'll come. With a nod, Nalnish led the way. As the party rode out, Micah awkward on an old Mustang he hadn't ridden in months, he couldn't shake the feeling that something vast and ancient was shifting around them. He felt the eyes of the mesa on his back, and somewhere in the growing wind, a coyote's howl split the morning, raw and hungry. The group traveled in uneasy silence, the vast landscape rolling away in all directions, sweeping vistas of red rock, wild sage, and sky as endless as memory. At the outskirts of the Navajo camp, dozens of eyes watched their approach. Some faces were curious, others cold, and a few filled with open hostility. But it was the elders, gathered around a smoky fire, who drew Micah's gaze. Their eyes seemed to hold the whole story of the land, joy, sorrow, and something more. As Nalnish introduced Micah and Tahsani, the camp quieted, waiting for what would happen next. For the first time since Sarah's passing, Micah felt the old nervous flutter, fear of the unknown, of stepping into someone else's story. But Tahsani, clutching the stone, looked up at him with a fragile trust. Micah laid a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. Whatever storms were coming, they'd face them together. The Navajo camp sprawled across the base of the red cliffs, a tapestry of woven tents and flickering fires alive with the morning bustle. Women pounded corn in stone mortars. Children chased wild dogs between the wagons. Old men smoked and watched with eyes narrowed by years of sun and grief. As Micah, Tahsani, and Chief Nalnish approached, every conversation seemed to hush, every eye turning to the outsider and the lost boy at his side. Micah could feel the weight of their stares, suspicion, resentment, but also something softer, something like hope. He kept close to Tasani, who seemed to shrink smaller with every step, clutching his deerskin bundle to his chest. At the center of camp, the council fire crackled. Around it sat the tribal elders, men and women wrapped in blankets patterned with lightning and wind. Nalnish offered a few words in Navajo, words that made the elders look from Tasani to Micah, measuring both of them, weighing stories against memory. Micah stood his ground. He felt out of place, tall and pale among the Navajo, but he squared his shoulders and nodded a silent greeting. He could feel Sarah's wedding band, worn smooth on his finger, grounding him, reminding him of her gentle courage. One of the elders, an old woman with long silver braids, motioned for Tasani to come closer. The boy hesitated, glancing up at Micah, who nodded encouragement. With trembling steps, Tasani approached, clutching the stone so tight his knuckles turned white. The woman spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You have walked a long shadow, child. We feared you lost." Tasani didn't answer. Instead, he stared into the fire, his lips moving soundlessly as if reciting some private prayer. The other elders conferred quietly. Then the old woman turned to Micah. "We thank you for bringing him back, but danger still prowls our borders. My grandson was not taken by wild beasts, nor by enemies from afar. There are those among us who stir old hatred, who whisper of war." Her gaze flicked to Nalnish, heavy with meaning. Micah felt the tension, the unspoken accusations hanging in the smoke. "The boy said nothing," he offered. "He just held on to that stone, wouldn't let go." At the mention of the stone, the elders murmured. The oldest man, his face lined like riverbeds, leaned forward. "Show us what you carry, Tasani." Slowly, with obvious reluctance, Tasani unwrapped the deerskin. Inside gleamed a dark, smooth stone, etched with spirals and lightning. Even Micah, who knew little of such things, felt the hairs on his arms rise. "The Mesa heart," one of the elders whispered, awe and fear mingling in the words. Nalnish's voice dropped low. "When my son was taken, it was not just for ransom. There are those who seek the Mesa hearts, relics of our ancestors, said to hold the spirit of the land. If the hearts are gathered, old powers might awaken." Micah frowned, glancing at the boy. "You're saying someone from your own tribe wanted to start a war, using this?" "Not just war." The old woman's eyes glittered. "They want to break the peace, to return to ways our ancestors left behind." Micah thought of Silver Creek, of men who saw every native as a threat, every sign of the old ways as a reason to load their rifles. He remembered too well how easy it was to spark violence when trust was so thin. Tasani sat beside the fire, the stone in his lap. He was shivering now, caught between exhaustion and a fear he could not voice. That night's wounds ran deeper than flesh. As the elders debated, Tasani's gaze went distant. He seemed to drift, lost in memory. Suddenly his lips moved, barely above a whisper. They wore red paint, spoke in the shadows, said the hearts would make them strong, bring the storm. The council fell silent. Micah realized the boy was speaking for the first time, voice raw with terror. The old woman pressed him gently. "Who took you, child?" Tasani trembled. "I never saw their faces. They came after sunset, told me to run if I valued my life. But I couldn't leave the stone. My mother gave it to me the night before." Nalnish's face was carved from granite, rage and pain warring in his eyes. "We will find who did this," he vowed. "We will not let them twist our people's pain into war." Micah reached for Tassani's hand, grounding the boy in the moment. "You're safe now, son. You're with folks who want to help." But as the sun climbed higher, shadows stretched long across the camp. Rumors spread quickly of betrayal, of sacred stones, of the white man riding with the chief's son. Old wounds reopened in every corner. Some muttered against Micah, others against the chief. There were heated arguments by the cook fires, suspicious glances, whispers that seemed to gather like storm clouds. That night, as the camp quieted, Micah and Tassani shared a small tent near the edge. The boy slept fitfully, mumbling about storms and stones. Micah, bone-weary, lay awake, staring at the canvas above. He'd come only to help a wounded boy, but found himself tangled in a web of secrets older than any ranch fence. He thought of Sarah, of her belief that no hurt was too old to heal, no enemy beyond forgiveness. He wondered if she'd be proud of him, or terrified for what he'd stepped into. Before dawn, Nalnish visited their tent, his expression grave. "We found tracks, white men and Navajo riding with them. They're heading for the old outlaw canyon. I want your help, Micah Evans. You saved my son. Now I ask you to help save my people's peace." Micah looked at the sleeping boy, at the deerskin bundle between them. He nodded, slow and steady. "I reckon I'm in this now. Let's finish what we started." And somewhere outside, thunder echoed off the mesa, promising that before this was over, all secrets would come to light. The first gray light of dawn crept over the mesas as Micah rolled up his bedroll and laced his boots, every movement taut with purpose. By the time the camp stirred to life, he was already with Chief Nalnish and a handful of warriors, their horses snorting clouds into the chill air. Tassani, wide-eyed but determined, stood with the group, gripping the deerskin-wrapped stone and looking far older than his years. Nalnish gave orders quietly. "We ride swift and silent. The Outlaw Canyon is 2 hours west, past the old water gulch. There are tracks, at least 3 white men, maybe more, and 2 Navajo. If they're working together, this is worse than we feared." Micah felt his gut tighten. He'd dealt with outlaws before, rustlers, drifters, even men he'd once called neighbors. But something about this felt different, older. The greed for sacred things, the willingness to use children as pawns. As he saddled the Mustang, he glanced at Tassani. "You sure you're up for this, kid?" Tassani nodded, his jaw set. "They have others. My friends. They took them too." Micah's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "2, Tassani whispered. "Little ones, Kachina and Lonato." Micah swore under his breath. That settled it. Whatever risks lay ahead, he wasn't turning back. As the party rode out, the sun finally cleared the horizon, casting everything in gold and orange. The mesa seemed to hold its breath, as if watching their passage. The ride to Outlaw Canyon was tense, every shadow a possible ambush. The warriors fanned out, scanning for fresh tracks or signs of movement. Micah rode near the front, eyes sharp. He noticed Tassani kept the stone tucked inside his shirt, one hand always pressed to it, as if drawing strength. When they reached the canyon, the world changed. Sheer rock walls rose on either side, stained with ancient petroglyphs, spirals, thunderbirds, and stick figures dancing in ghostly processions. It was a place of old power, and the air seemed thicker, charged with something unseen. Nalnish raised his fist, signaling the group to halt. He gestured for silence, then pointed out faint boot prints in the sand, mixed with smaller barefoot tracks. There, between the boulders, was a tangle of horse droppings and the faintest whiff of smoke. Micah dismounted, leading his horse as the group moved on foot. They crept along the edge of the canyon, moving from shadow to shadow. The sound of voices drifted up, a mix of English and Navajo, harsh laughter, the clatter of tin cups. From their vantage point behind a fallen log, they saw the outlaw camp. 3 rough men with rifles slung over their shoulders and 2 Navajo with red-painted faces. In the center, 2 frightened children huddled, hands bound, watched over by a surly outlaw with a scar twisting his lip. On a nearby rock, a burlap sack bulged with something that could only be more relics. Other sacred stones, wrapped in prayer cloth. Micah's pulse hammered in his ears. He glanced at Nalnish, who met his gaze with grim resolve. "We move at night," the chief whispered. "Too many guns in daylight. We wait, we watch. When they sleep, we strike." They waited as the sun arced overhead, hidden among the rocks and brush. Tasani huddled beside Micah, tense but silent, his eyes never leaving the captive children. At one point, Micah tried to distract him with quiet talk about horses, but the boy barely responded. He was locked in, focused, his whole world narrowed to that makeshift prison. Night fell, black and moonless. The outlaws built a fire, passing around a jug and laughing loudly, unaware of the eyes tracking their every move. One by one, the men bedded down, rifles within easy reach. Only the scar-faced man stayed awake, poking the fire and muttering to himself. Nalnish and his braves melted into the shadows. Micah nodded to Tasani. "Stay low. Only move when I say." It happened fast. Nalnish gave a coyote's yelp, the signal. Warriors sprang from the rocks, Micah right behind, moving silent as breath. The scar-faced outlaw barely had time to lift his rifle before Nalnish tackled him. Micah yanked a bound child free, cutting the ropes with his pocket knife. The other braves moved swiftly, wrestling down the second Navajo trader, who fought like a wildcat before being knocked cold. Gunfire erupted. One outlaw woke and fired blindly into the dark, the shot ricocheting off stone inches from Micah's head. Tasani, crouched behind a boulder, hurled a rock and struck the gunman's hand, buying Micah time to grab the fallen rifle. Chaos reigned for seconds. Shouts, shots, the wild hammer of hooves as one outlaw tried to mount and flee, only to be lassoed by a warrior from above. Then, suddenly, it was over. The outlaws lay tied and groaning in the dust. The children sobbed in relief, clutching Micah and Tasani as if they were family. Nalnish retrieved the burlap sack and reverently unwrapped its contents. A second mesa heart, etched with the same spirals as Tasani's stone. Micah knelt beside the boy, steadying his shaking hands. "You did good, kid. Real brave." Tasani nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks, but for the first time there was hope in his eyes. They left the canyon before dawn, carrying the rescued children, the stolen relics, and the knowledge that something much bigger was at stake. As the first light touched the mesa, Micah glanced back at the outlaw camp, smoke rising in the stillness, a reminder of how close violence always lurked. They returned to the Navajo camp as heroes, but also with warnings. There were still those who wanted the power of the mesa hearts. The storm was far from over, and as Tasani clutched both stones, Micah realized their fight had only just begun. By the time the rescuers returned to camp, dawn was just beginning to stain the eastern sky. The whole village turned out to greet them, a cautious hope flickering in the eyes of parents and elders. Word spread fast. The children were safe. And 2 sacred stones, the mesa hearts, had been recovered, but victory was laced with uncertainty. Everyone knew that outlaws and traitors weren't the only threat. There were deeper forces at work, forces that seemed woven into the very bones of Thunder Mesa. Micah, sore and bone-weary, rode beside Chief Nalnish as they led the rescued children home. Tassani, quiet and haunted, kept the stones wrapped in deerskin, clutching them so tightly his knuckles blanched white. The other children, Kachina and Lonato, clung to him as if his presence alone kept their nightmares at bay. The three looked older somehow, their innocence etched with hard-won courage. As the party dismounted in the camp, a hush fell. Elders gathered around the fire, eyes drawn to the bundle in Tassani's arms. Chief Nalnish gestured for silence, then lifted both stones for all to see. Even the children stilled, their wounds forgotten for a moment in the presence of those ancient relics. One of the oldest elders, a woman with hair white as frost and a voice deep as canyon shadows, spoke first. The Mesa hearts have not been together in living memory. The last time they were joined, our people saw the land shake and the thunder speak. Her words rippled through the crowd, half in warning, half in awe. Micah looked at Tassani. "What are these stones, really?" he whispered. "Why does everyone seem afraid?" Tassani hesitated, eyes flickering to Nalnish, who nodded encouragement. The boy set the stones carefully between them, tracing the spiral patterns with trembling fingers. "They are more than rocks," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "They are alive in a way. My mother told me the Mesa hearts hold the memory of the land, the pain and the hope, all mixed together. When my ancestors were lost, the stones guided them home." Nalnish continued the story, his gaze far away. "There is an old prophecy, older than these hills. It says that when both Mesa hearts are united, a great power will awaken beneath Thunder Mesa, something born from the first storm that ever touched this land. The stones are a gift, but also a warning. If used with greed or hatred, they could tear the world apart." Micah felt the hairs rise on his arms. And what happens if someone tries to use them for their own gain? A younger elder, fierce-eyed, answered sharply, "The land will rebel. Storms, fire, famine, things our people saw long ago. When warriors fought for power instead of peace. That is why the stones were hidden, why their story was only told in secret." Tassani's voice quivered. "The ones who took me, Red Paint and his men, they said the stones could make them strong, make everyone fear them. They wanted to use the hearts to control the Mesa, to drive settlers away and rule the land themselves." A ripple of anger moved through the elders, and even Nalnish's jaw clenched. "The Mesa hearts are meant to unite, not divide," he said quietly. "We cannot let them be twisted into weapons." The tension around the fire was heavy, but suddenly an elder stood, holding a clay bowl high. "It is time for the vision smoke," she announced. "We must seek guidance from the ancestors." The group gathered closer. A fragrant smoke rose from the bowl, curling in the cold air. Tassani and Micah sat side by side as the elders chanted softly in Navajo. The smoke seemed to thicken, shapes dancing in its folds, spirals, thunderbirds, horses running wild across the mesa. Micah's mind spun, images flashing behind his eyes, storms rolling over the land, lightning splitting stone, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the world. He felt Sarah's presence for a heartbeat, her hand on his shoulder, her voice urging him to stay strong. When the ritual ended, the elders' voices fell away. The oldest among them spoke, her voice carrying across the fire. The stones are awake now. What happens next will shape Thunder Mesa for generations. You, Tasani, are chosen by the spirits, and you, Micah Evans, are bound to his fate. Micah swallowed, the weight of the words settling on his chest. What do you need from me? Nalnish looked at him, eyes shining with gratitude and worry. We need a guardian, someone who can walk both worlds. The time will come when the hearts must be returned to the Mesa's summit, or darkness will fall. We ask you to stand with us, Micah Evans, as friend and protector. Micah looked at Tasani, who met his gaze with a strange, quiet strength. You got it, kid, Micah said, forcing a grin. We'll see this through together. Yet even as hope flickered, the threat loomed larger. Word spread that the outlaws were regrouping, and a strange unease settled over the camp. At the edge of the firelight, shadows seemed to move on their own, and dogs howled at the sky for reasons no one could name. That night, as the wind rose and thunder grumbled far away, Micah lay awake beside the fire. The stones, nestled between him and Tasani, seemed to pulse with a heartbeat all their own. For the first time, Micah understood. Their fight wasn't just against outlaws or greedy men. It was a fight for the spirit of Thunder Mesa itself. And as the first drops of rain pattered the dust, he promised himself, and Sarah's memory, that he would not fail. As the clouds thickened and the wind moaned across the mesa, the camp slipped into uneasy silence. News of the recovered Mesa hearts had drawn every eye, but the elders' warnings lingered like a chill. Shadows seemed to grow longer, and even the bravest children huddled closer to the fires, watching the distant thunder with wide, uneasy eyes. Micah couldn't sleep. Every time he shut his eyes, he heard whispers, Sarah's voice, the cry of the wind, the anxious murmurs of the tribe. He lay staring at the canvas of his tent, the faint glow of embers painting moving patterns on the fabric. Across from him, Tasani curled up with the stones pressed to his chest, his breaths shallow and troubled. In the dim firelight, Micah saw that the boy's face was tight with worry and exhaustion. Just before dawn, a tremor ran through the camp, subtle but enough to rattle pots and stir uneasy murmurs among the elders. Horses snorted and stamped nervously. Some claimed it was nothing but the earth settling, but Micah knew better. The ground felt alive, restless, like a giant stirring in its sleep. After a brief breakfast, Chief Nalnish gathered the group. We cannot hide here forever, he announced, his voice echoing over the camp. The rogue faction will come for the hearts. The spirits are restless. We must return the stones to Thunder Mesa. But first, we must seek the blessing of the ancestors in the sacred canyon. Tasani stood tall, the stones tucked safely in his pouch. I'm ready, he said quietly, voice steadier than before. Micah gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. I've got your back, kid. We stick together. The journey began beneath a sky thick with clouds, the sun a muted glow behind shifting gray. The group moved single file, Nalnish in front, followed by his best trackers, Tasani and Micah close behind. The elders sent prayers on the wind, and a handful of warriors fanned out to watch for trouble. They followed a narrow path twisting through sagebrush and sandstone, crossing dry creeks and boulder-strewn gullies. As they passed ancient petroglyphs, spirals, handprints, and deer running across the rocks, Micah felt the weight of centuries pressing down. He'd always believed the land held memories, but now it seemed those memories wanted to wake up and speak. As the sun climbed higher, a sudden, sharp cry split the air. One of the warriors had spotted movement, a flash of color darting behind a crumbling wall. Nalnish signaled for silence, and the group melted into the rocks. For a tense moment, all they heard was the wind. Then, from the shadows, a wild-eyed coyote burst out, yipping and snarling before vanishing down the trail. Tasani gasped, clutching the stones, but Nalnish just nodded grimly. "The spirits test us," he murmured. "They want to know if our hearts are true." They pressed on, climbing higher as the canyons narrowed and the land grew stranger. Micah caught glimpses of animal bones wedged in crevices, feathers tied with red string fluttering from twisted branches, and stone cairns balanced at impossible angles. Every few hundred yards, the air grew colder, and the silence pressed in, thick and unyielding. At midday, they stopped at a spring-fed pool ringed with wildflowers. The elders formed a circle and began to sing, their voices rising and falling like the wind. Tasani sat beside Micah, knees pulled to his chest. "I'm scared," the boy admitted quietly. Micah watched the elders, feeling a strange peace settle over him. "Me too, sometimes. Back when Sarah was sick, I didn't know how to be strong. But you don't have to be brave all by yourself. You got me, and you got them." He nodded toward Nalnish and the elders. "You're not alone, Tasani." Tasani smiled, small but real. "I dreamed of my mother last night," he whispered. "She told me not to be afraid. She said the stones would help heal the land if I trusted my heart." Before Micah could answer, the singing stopped. One of the elders beckoned Tasani forward. He approached the spring, knelt, and dipped the stones into the water. As he did, a wind whipped through the canyon, setting every wildflower trembling and sending ripples across the pool. The elders nodded, satisfied. "The ancestors have given their blessing," one intoned. "But danger still follows. We must hurry." As they left the canyon, the sun dipped behind thickening clouds. The land seemed to darken, every shadow deeper, every sound sharper. Somewhere behind them, a distant shout echoed. Men's voices, harsh and angry. The rogue faction had found their trail. Nalnish urged the group forward. "Faster! They are close!" They ran, hearts pounding, as the canyon walls closed in and the sky turned to lead. At a narrow pass, Micah turned and saw horsemen gaining ground. Outlaws and painted faces, rifles gleaming, teeth bared in cruel smiles. A chase erupted, wild and desperate. Tasani clung to Micah as they vaulted rocks and ducked thorny scrub. Bullets spanged off the stones, shouts echoing in the canyon. Nalnish's warriors fought a running retreat, loosing arrows and hurling rocks to slow their pursuers. Just when it seemed they would be overrun, the path split around a boulder. Micah shoved Tasani ahead. "Go! Don't stop!" Tasani bolted into the brush, Micah hot on his heels. The others followed, scattering as the pursuers split up, cursing and firing wildly. The land itself seemed to rise up. Roots snagged boots, dust swirled into blinding clouds, and from the cliffs, ravens wheeled and screamed. When the danger finally passed, the group regrouped in a narrow ravine, gasping for breath. They'd lost the outlaws, but everyone was shaken. Micah put a hand on Tasani's shoulder. "You did good, kid. You kept your head." Tasani nodded, sweat beading his brow. "We're almost there, aren't we?" Nalnish, breathing hard, managed a grim smile. "Yes. But the hardest test is yet to come." As darkness fell and distant thunder rolled again, Micah and Tasani knew there would be no turning back. The fate of the land, of everyone they cared about, hung on what happened next atop Thunder Mesa. Dusk settled over Thunder Mesa, painting the sky in bruised purple and fading gold. The small group, exhausted and wary, huddled beneath a rocky outcrop just shy of the summit, wary eyes scanning the wind-carved landscape for any sign of pursuit. The wild canyons behind them seemed to whisper with restless spirits, while the way ahead felt no less dangerous. Tasani pressed the deerskin pouch close to his heart, feeling the stones throb with an uncanny warmth. Micah, ever vigilant, checked his rifle and tried to steady his own nerves. But before they could catch their breath, the rumble of hoofbeats shattered the fragile quiet. A new threat, not from outlaws or traitors, but from the distant world of uniforms and flags. From the shadows emerged a detachment of the U.S. cavalry, blue coats dusted and boots muddy from the hard ride. They moved with military precision, rifles glinting and eyes narrowed with suspicion. Leading them was Captain Mortlake, a tall man with a mustache as sharp as a hawk's beak and a gaze that flicked over the group with practiced calculation. At his side rode a young lieutenant with eager eyes, and behind them, half a dozen men fanned out in a show of force. Micah stepped forward, one hand raised, the other close to his holstered Colt. "Evening, Captain. We're not looking for trouble, just passing through with friends." Mortlake's lips twisted in a humorless smile. "I could say the same, Mr. Evans, but we received word that something mighty strange was happening up here. Native hostages, stolen relics, gunfire. I intend to get to the bottom of it." Nalnish met Mortlake's stare, unflinching. "Your help is not needed. This is sacred ground. We are returning what was stolen." Mortlake dismounted with a thud, boots stirring the dust. "Sacred or not, the law runs on this mesa too. Hand over the stones, and we can all avoid a mess." Tension crackled in the air. The Navajo warriors tensed, arrows knocked and eyes hard. The cavalry's rifles gleamed, each man waiting for a reason to raise them. In that moment, it seemed one wrong move would tip them into chaos. Suddenly, the earth trembled, a subtle shiver rolling beneath their feet. From the cliffs above, a flock of ravens exploded into the sky, cawing wildly. Micah felt the hairs on his arms rise. Something ancient, something watching, made the air feel heavy as lead. The elders stepped forward, chanting softly, their voices weaving into the wind. Tasani clutched Micah's hand, eyes wide, as ghostly shapes began to flicker at the edge of sight. Pale figures swirling in the rising dust, faces etched with sorrow and pride. The soldiers froze, rifles half raised. Mortlake's voice faltered. "What in blazes?" A cold wind swept over the mesa, carrying with it a chorus of voices, some angry, some grieving, some pleading for peace. The ghostly forms grew clearer. Warriors, mothers, children, all caught in an endless dance of memory and longing. The boundary between worlds grew thin, and even the toughest cavalrymen stared in silent awe. Micah's heart pounded. He remembered the stories Sarah used to read aloud, legends of places where the living and the dead brushed shoulders, where the past was never truly gone. Now, those stories were real. The stones in Tasani's pouch seemed to pulse in time with the heartbeat of the land. The standoff reached its breaking point when a spectral warrior, tall, proud, face painted in ancient designs, stepped between the two groups. He lifted his hand, and the wind howled through the canyons, shaking loose pebbles and rattling gear. Captain Mortlake found his voice. "Get behind me, men!" But his words were hollow. His men hesitated, caught between fear and duty. Nalnish's voice rang out, low and steady. "The mesa remembers. It does not want blood. If we fight here, we curse ourselves and all who come after." For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then Tasani, trembling but resolute, stepped forward. "We don't have to fight. The stones, they're not weapons. They're a promise. My mother said they're meant to heal, not destroy." He met Micah's gaze. Micah nodded, understanding what the boy needed. He placed a hand on Tasani's shoulder. "Let him speak," Micah said firmly to Mortlake and Nalnish alike. "Let the Mesa hear him." With every eye upon him, Navajo, cavalry, and ghosts, Tasani unwrapped the stones, holding them high. "This land is tired of hate. The spirits are tired. My ancestors want peace. We can choose it right now." As if in answer, the ghostly figures began to fade, their voices softening into the wind. The thunder above rolled closer, but its tone was no longer angry, more like a warning or a challenge. The ground stilled. Mortlake stared, shaken. His grip on authority faltered. "What do you want us to do, boy?" "Let us finish what we started," Tasani pleaded. "Let us return the stones so the land can rest. Help us or stand aside, please." The young lieutenant, eyes wide with awe, stepped forward. "Sir, maybe we should listen. I've never seen anything like this." Mortlake hesitated, pride and fear warring in his face. At last, he nodded. "You've got 1 hour, but if I see so much as a sign of trickery, I'll bring down the whole fort on this mesa. Understood?" Nalnish inclined his head. "We ask only for your trust." The groups, uneasy but united by what they'd witnessed, formed a wary truce. The warriors lowered their weapons. The cavalry stepped back, watching, curious and humbled. And for the first time, Micah felt the tide of fate turning, not with gunfire, but with hope. As the group climbed the final trail toward Thunder Mesa's summit, Tasani led the way, Micah close behind, and even the captain and his men kept respectful distance. The spirits, for now, had been heard. But the greatest test still waited at the storm-shrouded peak, where the hearts of stone and the hearts of all who walked the mesa would be weighed. And somewhere in that gathering twilight, a new courage took root, binding the living and the lost in a fragile, precious peace. The sky above Thunder Mesa was a boiling cauldron, clouds black and heavy, swirling as if the land itself breathed anger and anticipation. Lightning flickered behind the peaks, casting strange, shifting shadows over the summit trail. As Tasani led the group upward, each step felt charged, as if the stones in his pouch tugged him toward something ancient waiting to be awakened. Micah walked close behind, every sense on high alert. He glanced back often, making sure the cavalrymen kept their distance. Captain Mortlake and his squad, unsettled by the ghostly visions, gripped their rifles but held their fire. The Navajo elders moved with somber purpose, chanting in low voices, sending prayers to the ancestors for guidance and mercy. By the time they reached the mesa's crown, the air itself seemed to shimmer, thick with the coming storm. The summit was ringed by old stone spirals, half buried in sagebrush and wildflowers. There the wind roared louder, threatening to sweep everyone from the edge of the world. The group stopped at the center of the ancient circle, where the earth looked scorched by 1,000 years of lightning strikes. Nalnish raised his hand for silence. "It must be here," he declared, voice carrying above the wind. "The hearts must be reunited atop the mesa. Only then can the storm be calmed." But even as he spoke, the last of the rogue faction appeared. Red Paint and his followers, faces streaked with ochre and desperation, flanked by 2 of the outlaws who'd escaped the canyon ambush. They moved quickly, driven by greed and fear, brandishing pistols and makeshift clubs. Red Paint's voice was harsh, nearly lost in the gale. "Give us the stones. With their power, we will drive the settlers from our land forever. We will become the storm itself." Micah and Nalnish moved to shield Tasani. But before anyone could react, a bolt of lightning struck the ground at their feet, blinding everyone with white-hot light. The stones in Tasani's pouch pulsed and grew warm, then burned with a glow that seemed to come from the earth itself. As chaos erupted, shouts, gunshots, the wail of the wind, the two sides clashed in the storm's heart. The cavalry tried to hold their line, unsure who to trust. The rogue warriors lunged at Tasani, desperate for the stones. Micah fought like a man possessed, knocking an outlaw aside, then turning to drag Tasani back as Red Paint lunged for the pouch. But it was the stones that decided the fight. As Tasani, trembling but resolute, raised them high, a shockwave pulsed through the ground. Time seemed to slow. The clouds churned lower, and ghostly shapes, ancestors, warriors, mothers, children, swirled above the circle, their cries joining the roar of thunder. Tasani's voice, small but clear, rose above the tumult. "You cannot claim what belongs to all. The hearts of the Mesa are not for war. They are for healing, for peace." The storm redoubled its fury. Red Paint tried to wrestle the stones from Tasani, but a spectral figure, a woman with long braids and eyes filled with sorrow, stepped between them. Her touch sent Red Paint staggering back, his fury dissolving into terror. The other rogues shrank away, dropping their weapons as the ancestors' voices filled their ears. Micah, caught between awe and fear, steadied Tasani. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Do what you came here to do." Guided by the memory of his mother's stories, Tasani knelt in the center of the stone spiral and pressed both hearts into the earth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground shuddered, and a column of light erupted from the spot, racing skyward to meet the storm. A deafening clap of thunder echoed for miles. Wind tore at everyone's clothes, whipping hats and blankets into the void. But as quickly as it had risen, the storm began to break. The black clouds parted, revealing a sky streaked with gold and turquoise. Rain fell, warm and gentle, washing blood and dust from the faces of friend and foe alike. The ghostly shapes above the mesa danced in the fading light, their voices changing, no longer angry or mournful, but grateful. As the last of the ancestors faded into the dawn, Red Paint and his men collapsed, broken by the weight of what they had witnessed. The cavalry lowered their rifles, humbled and shaken. Captain Mortlake stared at Tasani with a strange respect, his bravado stripped away. The elders, weeping with relief, embraced the children and knelt in thanks to the spirits. Micah crouched beside Tasani, who looked utterly spent, as if the whole world's sorrow and hope had passed through his small body. "You did it," Micah said, voice trembling. "You brought peace." Tasani managed a tired smile. "We did it. Together." Nalnish approached, laying a hand on Micah's shoulder. "You are of the Mesa now, friend. You have walked through shadow and storm and did not turn away." As the sun climbed above Thunder Mesa, the survivors gathered in a circle, Navajo and settler, cavalry and child, bound by what they had seen and done. The old wounds were not all healed, but the land was quieter, the air softer, as if the mesa itself had drawn a deep, cleansing breath. The stones remained buried where Tasani placed them, their power returned to the earth. For the first time in memory, Thunder Mesa was at peace, not just from violence, but from the anger that had haunted both land and people for generations. The promise of a new beginning shimmered in the sunlight, and for the first time in a long time, Micah allowed himself to believe in hope. Dawn over Thunder Mesa painted everything in hues of fire and honey. The storm had washed the land clean, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed sacred, a silence that vibrated with possibility. The stone spirals atop the mesa gleamed wet and new, their ancient markings standing out against the red earth as if they'd been carved that very morning. Micah Evans stood at the edge of the summit, hat in hand, watching as the sunlight crept across the faces of those gathered in a wide, loose circle. There were elders and children, warriors and cavalrymen, settlers who'd come up from Silver Creek out of curiosity or concern. The air was full of cautious hope, but also an awkwardness, as people who had always looked at each other as enemies now shared the same ground. Tassani sat in the center, legs folded, back straight, his gaze clear and calm. He looked different. Older, yes, but also lighter, as if the stone's weight had been replaced by something gentle and unbreakable. The elders approached him one by one, laying their hands on his shoulders, whispering blessings and words of gratitude in Navajo. Some of the women wept openly, calling him Boy of Thunder and praising his courage. Nalnish addressed the crowd, his voice ringing over the mesa. "You have all seen what happened here. The hearts of the mesa have spoken. We cannot forget our past, but today we choose a new path. We must be more than just enemies, more than just neighbors. We must become kin to this land and to each other." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, as if a dam had broken, a few settlers stepped forward, among them old Mrs. Harlan, who ran the general store, and her sons. They removed their hats and bowed their heads. "We don't understand all your ways," she said, voice quavering. "But I saw what the boy did. I seen the spirits too. Maybe it's time to try something different." Captain Mortlake, his blue coat still spattered with dust and rain, strode to the center and stood by Nalnish. "The United States Army will not interfere with your ceremonies. What we saw up here, well, there's no law in any book that covers it." His voice softened. "We'll ride back to the fort, but we leave in peace. And if there's trouble from outsiders, we'll remember who stood for this mesa." A ripple of agreement passed through both sides. Someone from the settlers group called out, "What about the outlaws and those who tried to take the stones?" Nalnish turned to where Red Paint and his followers sat, bound and silent at the far edge of the summit. "Justice belongs to all who call this land home. They will face our council, and their fate will be decided by both Navajo and settler voices. There must be no more revenge, only truth and the healing that comes with it." Micah watched the scene unfold, feeling an unfamiliar warmth unfurl in his chest. He caught Tassani's eye, and the boy grinned, a true, open smile, as if for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. The rest of that day passed in a blur of ritual and conversation. Food was shared, blue cornbread and stewed beans from Navajo pots, salted beef and sweet biscuits from settler baskets. Children played together in the sage, their laughter ringing down the slopes. The old barriers didn't vanish in a moment, but as the sun moved across the sky, they seemed thinner, less important. Micah found himself seated with Nalnish and a handful of elders beneath a juniper tree, sharing stories and quiet jokes. For the first time, the talk was not of fear or suspicion, but of crops, horses, and the future. Will you stay? Nalnish asked quietly, not looking directly at Micah. Micah turned the question over in his mind. He'd come to Thunder Mesa a broken man, haunted by loss and drawn to the land's harsh solitude. But here, among these people in this wild beauty, he'd found purpose again. I think I will, he said. If there's room for a stubborn rancher and an orphaned boy, we'll make a life here. Nalnish nodded. There's always room for those who protect the land. You are a bridge, Micah Evans, between worlds. As dusk approached, a final ceremony was held by the stone spirals. The elders spoke words of healing over the land and the people. Tasani was asked to lead, his voice sure as he thanked the ancestors for their guidance and begged them to watch over the mesa. When he finished, every person, Navajo, settler, soldier, placed a stone on the spiral, a symbol of their shared promise to protect the land and each other. As the crowd dispersed, Tasani lingered beside Micah, looking out over the valleys stretching far to the west. Do you think it will last? He asked quietly. Micah considered. Nothing in this world is certain, kid. But what you did, what we all did together, it's a start. Sometimes that's all you need. The air was sweet with the scent of rain and wildflowers. For the first time in living memory, there was no fear between the camps, only the fragile, exhilarating hope of peace. Later, as the fires burned low and families gathered their things to go, Tasani was embraced not just as a survivor, but as a future leader of his tribe. The elders called him Boy of Thunder, promising he would carry their wisdom into the years ahead. Children ran up to him, laughing, no longer afraid. Micah watched all this from the shadows, feeling Sarah's memory at his shoulder. He knew now that healing was possible, not just for the land, but for broken people too. As the first stars pricked the indigo sky, he and Tasani climbed a small rise to watch the darkness gather over the mesa. The old pain was still there, but something stronger had taken root. A promise, a new beginning, and the quiet certainty that sometimes, when you open your heart, the world changes with you. The days that followed the storm on Thunder Mesa felt like the beginning of a new world. The air was softer, the colors of the land somehow brighter. For the first time in generations, the boundaries between the Navajo, the settlers, and the soldiers had blurred, not erased entirely, but softened enough for hope to take root. Micah Evans woke each morning before the sun, his old aches a little less sharp, his mind clearer than it had been in years. There was work to be done, always fences to mend, horses to feed, water to draw. Yet each task felt lighter, carried by the knowledge that he was no longer alone. In the evenings, he'd share stories and laughter by the fires with people who'd once watched him with suspicion or fear. He'd become a bridge, just as Nalnish had said, a friend, a neighbor, a mentor. Tasani, once the frightened boy clutching a stone, now walked the mesa with a steady step and a ready smile. He was never far from Micah's side. Children followed him everywhere, eager for tales of the storm and the ancestors, for his kindness and his bravery. The elders spoke of him as Boy of Thunder, but to the younger ones, he was simply a friend who'd shown them that courage could change the world. One morning, Micah and Tasani climbed to the highest point of the mesa together. They carried a basket of wildflowers, each one gathered by a different child or elder, a gift for the ancestors. The stone spirals at the summit were freshly marked with pebbles and beads, tokens from all who had joined in the new beginning. They sat side by side, legs dangling over the ledge, The world spread before them, a rolling sea of gold grass and red stone, with the distant river glinting under the sun. Silence settled between them, comfortable and full of meaning. Tasani looked out over the land. "Do you think they're watching?" he asked. Micah followed his gaze, feeling the weight and warmth of Sarah's memory beside him. "I do. I think the ancestors and everyone we ever loved are part of this place. Every breeze, every bird call." Tasani nodded, clutching a small feather. "Sometimes I feel her, my mother. When I close my eyes, it's like she's singing to me on the wind." They stayed there for a while, letting the sun climb and the day begin in earnest. In the camp below, life resumed its rhythm, but nothing was quite as it had been before. The cavalry had returned to their fort, keeping their word and leaving the mesa in peace. The settlers had begun visiting the Navajo camp with gifts and questions, eager to understand rather than judge. There were awkward moments, yes, and hard conversations, but there was laughter too, and trust, built slowly, with every shared story, every meal, every hand extended across the firelight. Nalnish grew fond of walking with Micah in the evenings, sharing tobacco and wisdom beneath the stars. "The land remembers those who keep their promises," he said one night. "It remembers pain, but it remembers kindness too. Now it will remember you, Micah Evans, and the boy who brought the thunder." At the changing of the seasons, the entire community gathered for a great feast on the mesa. There was singing in both English and Navajo, children performing dances to honor the spirits, the elders offering blessings for rain and abundance. The memory of the storm was still fresh, but it had become a story of unity, not division. Tasani was honored with a necklace of turquoise and shell, a symbol of leadership and hope. "You are the bridge between worlds now," Nalnish declared before everyone. "May you never forget the storm or the peace that followed." After the feast, when the last embers of the fire had burned low and most of the camp had drifted into sleep, Micah and Tasani walked to the spiral one final time. The night air was cool and clear, the stars scattered like diamonds above the mesa. The wind carried 1,000 whispered prayers. Tasani crouched by the spiral, his hands tracing the ancient patterns in the stone. "Do you think it will last?" he asked softly, echoing the question he'd asked before. Micah knelt beside him. "Peace is like this land. Beautiful, but it takes work. You have to watch it, care for it, forgive when it's hard, and remember what matters. But if you do, it can last a lifetime, and more." For a while they sat in silence, the hush of the land holding them close. Then Micah spoke again, voice quiet but sure. "This place healed me, Tasani. It showed me that family isn't just blood, and home isn't just a cabin or a camp. It's the people who walk with you when the storm comes, and stay with you when it passes." Tasani smiled, his eyes shining in the starlight. "Thank you, Micah, for everything." They watched the sunrise together from the highest point of Thunder Mesa. The ancient carvings seemed to glow in the first light, a promise written in stone, kept by those who dared to hope. Down below, life stirred in both camps. Children ran, dogs barked, a new day called to them all. In time, the story of the boy and the storm became legend. The mesa was never quite the same. Its scars remained, but its spirit was stronger for what had happened. And the people who called it home, Navajo, settler, friend, and stranger, walked a little taller, spoke a little kinder, and remembered what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves. As Micah and Tasani returned to the camp, They passed through the spiral, each leaving behind a small stone, a final promise to the land and to each other. So ends the story of Thunder Mesa and the boy who became its heart. From a wound, healing grew. From enemies, family was forged. In the land of storm and sun, a lesson endures. Only by facing our old hurts together, with courage, kindness, and forgiveness, can we find true peace. If you believe in that promise, let this story live in you. Like, share, and follow the channel to keep these tales alive, because hope, like thunder on the mesa, always finds a way to return. Let me know if you'd like a summary, lesson, or a special call to action for your channel. Thank you for this storytelling journey.